I'm with a camera Arabic researcher, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis, and we're talking about the BBC documentary that followed the lives of three Gaza children. Now, tell us about the documentary and who were these three children?
All right. So the documentary was produced by a company that was later revealed to be external to the BBC, also London-based. But the BBC has broadcast it saying that it had full editorial control over the content. As you said, the documentary was about the lives of three children during the course of the war up until late October of 2024, more or less late October 2024. No, actually, there was also a scene where the ceasefire was announced in January of 2025. So a year and 3 months of these children's lives in the Gaza Strip. They were Abdullah, who was the narrator and the only English speaker of the three. The girl, her name was Ronad, and there was a third boy whose name escapes me. The family name was Sirsik, who was living in the hospital. It was presented as though he was living in the hospital. And the independent journalist, London-based independent journalist David Collier, revealed that Abdullah is actually Abdullah al-Yazuri, the son of Ayman al-Yazuri, who is the deputy agricultural minister in the Hamas government. The girl, Renad, was later revealed to be the daughter of a police officer, again, in the Hamas-controlled police force. And the third boy was a photo of him with a headband of Al-Qassam battalions holding a gun next to a real Al-Qassam battalion's terrorists. That photo also resurfaced after the documentary was published, and all of these Hamas connections were revealed by David Collier, who is an independent journalist.
So these weren't just any old kids. They had so much linking to Hamas. Do they not check these people out before they actually do interviews with them?
Well, that is the big question, and that is up to the BBC to publish the results of its investigations as for regarding what exactly was the procedure that was supposed to find out these children's links to Hamas and what went wrong in this procedure. According to the BBC, the current version of the BBC is that the production company was aware of at least Abdullah al-Yazuri's connections to Hamas, to the Hamas government, but it was not shared with the BBC itself. This needs to be more thoroughly investigated before we know exactly what happened.
Now, would these families have been paid for making this documentary? And would this be the BBC giving money to Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, and Hamas is banned in England, so they'd actually be breaking the law by giving money to Hamas from the UK?
Again, this is what the UK authorities have already raised suspicions about. The current BBC version is that while the father is a Hamas official, the payments were transferred to his daughter, Abdullah's sister, and her mother, Abdullah's mother, and her mother, who is also obviously Abdullah's mother. This sounds a bit ridiculous, but that's what they're saying. There is a possibility that we didn't break the law because we only paid the mother and the sister, but not the father. The other two, it's less clear what kind of payments were transferred and by whom. This is still up to investigation exactly what are their connections, but obviously their connections to Hamas are less clear than Abdullah's.
Was the documentary translated correctly? Are there examples of any bad translation at all?
Well, the major major findings that our team has come up with, our team meaning Camera Arabics, concern the use of the word Yahud in the film. Yahud obviously means Jews in Arabic, but the BBC subtitles said instead either Israel, Israelis, or Israeli forces whenever the word Yehud came up. A further mistranslation concerns the word jihad. It was somewhat sanitized by translated into fighting or struggle, where the entire religious aspect of jihad, meaning engaging war in the name of Islam, was sanitized by the BBC subtitles.
Were there other examples of things wrong, or than just them two?
Well, there were 5 Yahud references and 2 jihad references. And another part where there is a scene where a doctor waves an amputated hand in front of a camera and says, "This is what it has come down to," but the BBC subtitles said, "This is what the Israelis have done," which he doesn't say the word Israelis at all. So I would say there are 7 cases in which there were gross omissions in the subtitles.
Tell us about the cameraman who was making this video, who worked on the documentary. Did he glorify terrorism?
2 out of the 3 cameramen we and David Collier found evidence for them glorifying terrorism. One cameraman posted on October 7th an emoji, a saluting emoji saying the flood, meaning the flood, the Al-Aqsa flood, which is the name given by Hamas to the October 7th attack. And another cameraman posted 2 posts glorifying October 7th on his X profile, and another post glorifying a previous attack on April 2023, which killed a civilian in Tel Aviv, a ramming attack which killed a civilian in Tel Aviv. So at least 2 out of the 3 cameramen did celebrate terrorism on social media.
Didn't this whole video feel like it was a sense of Hamas propaganda?
Yes, it was a rather sophisticated one, though. The problem is that there was hardly any criticism or critical view of what had happened in the Israeli side, and the situation of the hostages, they're basically mentioned in a word or 2. So obviously it was all very one-sided, but also the mistranslations and the fact that the people involved had so many links to Hamas and some of them glorify terrorism, it all points to the fact that it all gave a very sanitized view of what things in Gaza are like. Now nobody can say there has not been an omission. You know that the people responsible for making the film were not impartial. So really you cannot know from this film what was really the situation on the ground, and therefore it was a propaganda piece in the sense that it was not a documentary.
So this is really the BBC taking sides, isn't it?
The BBC has been taking sides for years. Camera and others have exposed them countless times in BBC output in English, in Arabic, even in other languages. We do not think at this point that BBC impartiality is claim even worth fighting. There is so much evidence claiming otherwise that anybody can just go to our website and other people's websites and see for themselves that the BBC has been taking sides, not since October 7th, but years and years before.
Is there pressure on the BBC to comply with the Palestinian narrative? I know, me being here in Bethlehem, many Palestinians would say, oh, well, we'd rather have Israel coming in and taking Bethlehem and living under Israeli rule because the Palestinian Authority is corrupt. They couldn't say that in public, but they'll say that in private. So do many journalists in the BBC feel the pressure to actually run with the Palestinian narrative?
Yes, it's a mix of the fact that they are not reporting from a democratic society, and they're being awfully uncritical about that, and there's an awful lack of challenging the speakers around these points. But it's also a case of, lazy journalism. These voices that you quote, the reporters are oblivious to. They don't search them hard enough, even though they're around all the time. So I would say it is a mix of lack of professionality and laziness and lack of critical thinking towards the non-democratic society they report from.
Tell us more about your work with camera and working in the Arabic side.
So in the Arabic side, sometimes the bias is more out there than the in English. Not that the English is not biased, it is very much biased, but in Arabic it's more often pronounced. The BBC on October 10th, there was a video in BBC Arabic that questioned whether the Kfar Aza massacre has even happened, presenting it as a dual narrative story, right? Israel says that there was a massacre in the kibbutz. Hamas says there was not a massacre in the kibbutz because all it did was target military targets. And we're the BBC, we're neutral, so obviously we'll never know the truth whether there was a massacre or there wasn't a massacre. This kind of an item, even BBC English would not have broadcast. So in this respect, yes, the BBC in Arabic the bias is more pronounced than in English.
So the English would never broadcast an article like that, but the Arabic feels free to be able to broadcast it and question that.
Yes, and part of the problem is that there is not enough oversight over the Arabic content.
It sounds very similar to Holocaust denial in some ways. You know, a big massacre happens, and then you've got like certain views and areas saying, no, this just didn't happen.
It is similar because the mechanisms of denial of atrocities specifically happening to Jews are similar throughout, all across the board in the world and in the BBC in particular, yes.
How would you work with this? Do you go then back to the BBC and tell them, look, this is wrong, this needs to be changed?
So we are trying to build ourselves a name of a fact-based monitor, and our criticism is always facts-based. And it's just done, one complaint after the other. That's really the way to do it. Even though obviously the complaint system of the BBC cannot call it competent. We're talking about sometimes delays of months. Most of the complaints that we submit are late. So you cannot call this complaint system efficient or competent, and we obviously call for changing it, but this is what we have, and we've done good work with what we have.
I guess when it's months and months later, the story's already gone out, the damage has already been done, and putting a little correction doesn't really do anything, does it?
Not only that, there are hardly any editor's note. The vast majority of corrections do not result in editor's note. It's very much as though they didn't correct at all. They just change one word or two words in the report, but they don't say anywhere, we got it wrong. And even if you have an editor's note in the report itself after months, well, that's nice. But the BBC does not recognize there's a trend here. They corrected between 30 and 40 times, I think, they corrected the word settlement in Arabic, mustawtana, over the first year of the war. And every time they corrected, sure, but they would not admit there's a trend here. There's a trend here to call Jewish communities inside Israel's internationally recognized borders, settlements, as though they're illegitimate. That kind of recognition, that kind of acknowledgement, apology is just not in the cards still, unfortunately. And by the way, the Arabic video which questioned whether the Kfar Aza massacre ever happened, public apology was never issued for that one either.
And there's so much video evidence that actually Hamas produced themselves when they went to attack these places, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. In the end, they took it down, but they never apologized.
Is it just the BBC Arabic you work with, or do you work with looking at other news agencies as well?
I do all the Arabic-speaking subsidiaries of Western media outlets, which means I also do France 24. They're even worse than the BBC, if that's even possible. And that's the French. Deutsche Welle, the Germans are better. Deutsche Welle also has an Arabic subsidiary. They're better. They're the only Arabic-speaking media outlet I know that consistently calls October 7th an act of terrorism, which is a lot. The Al-Hura, we've been doing very good work with Al-Hura, which is the American public broadcaster in Arabic. We're doing very good work with them as well. So I would say Deutsche Welle and Al-Hura are probably the best places to look for coverage of Israel-related affairs in Arabic that's not influenced by propaganda.
Why do you do what you do? It must be sort of exciting to see things change within the media.
Well, it's a very long struggle, like we've been doing this for years and only now do things start being noticed in the mainstream media in the UK as far as the BBC is concerned. So it's good to see the fruits of your hard work and years of research and monitoring finally bear fruits, and hopefully it would change the course of things and would contribute to finally the reform that is so needed in the BBC, both in English and in Arabic.
What is your hope for the future as far as media is concerned?
More oversight, more oversight from publicly funded media outlets, more critical thinking among media consumers. That is always a good result to the work that we do. And that journalists would demonstrate more professional approach towards what they're covering.
Well, thank you very much for sharing today.
Thank you very much.